Welcome to our channel, Book by Book. Today we are cracking open a book that, honestly, it speaks directly to every single person who leads a team, manages a budget, or, simply cares about the success of their organization. It's Stephanie York's Mastering Hiring, Building High-Performance Teams.
And that title, it's really a promise and a challenge all at once. York's premise is just devastatingly simple. We often approach hiring, which is, the single most critical variable in business success, with a total amateur's tool set.
Oh, absolutely.
We're relying on these shaky foundations like gut instinct, rushed interviews, and outdated, non-structured processes. It's more like an act of faith than a system of engineering.
That, to me, is the real tragedy of modern management. I mean,
Oh.
we'll spend months agonizing over the tiny details of product roadmaps, marketing funnels, quarterly budgets, but then when it comes time to choose the very people who are going to execute all those complex plans, we just fall back on a single 45-minute conversation and a resume that, let's be honest, probably has some creative embellishments.
Right, it's a systemic failure.
It is.
And the stakes, well, they couldn't be higher. York lays out the cost of a wrong hire so clearly, and it goes way, way beyond just the immediate financial hit. It's the huge cost in time. I mean, the leadership hour is just wasted correcting errors. It's the money spent on retraining, recruitment fees, severance, and then there's the almost irreversible damage to team morale and the complete loss of momentum.
You're putting a brake on your own company.
A hard break. If you hire poorly, you are stopping your business's future growth, and you often don't even realize it until it's far too late.
So this summary isn't just about, tweaking a few HR forms or adding one more step to the interview process. This book argues for a total, complete strategic overhaul. We're moving past the chaos, the desperation, the reliance on intuition. So what's the central idea, the thesis that really underpins everything York introduces?
The core idea, the real blueprint of the entire book, is summed up in this one quote. She says, "Your hiring system determines the quality of your team, and your team determines the future of your business." That just flips the whole paradigm. It says that if you are repeatedly making bad hires, the fault isn't in the talent pool. The fault is in the actual structure you've built to attract, screen, and select that talent. You can't really blame the fish if the net you're using has massive holes in it.
Okay, let's unpack that a little.
Yeah.
York is basically telling us to just abandon relying on instinct or urgency or, how personally impressed we are by a candidate's charm.
Exactly.
And instead, we have to focus rigorously on what? Absolute clarity, structural integrity.
And measurable behavioral evidence
Yeah.
and deep, deep values alignment. The whole goal is to engineer a process that is repeatable, that's predictable, and that's defensible.
Because if the process is broken,
If your process is broken or chaotic, or it relies too much on subjective opinion, you will repeatedly hire the wrong people. Guaranteed. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of candidates you screen. York provides a systematic approach, and it's specifically designed to mitigate our own human flaws in interviewing our tendency to trust that surface-level charm or make snap judgments based on things that don't matter. She's giving us a scientific method for human selection.
all right, so now that we have that core concept, the system matters most, let's jump into the strategic foundation. And we can start with lesson 1, which challenges a huge, maybe the biggest, misconception in mid to large organizations. Hiring is leadership, not HR.
Yes. This point really needs to resonate with every CEO and senior manager listening to this. We see this fundamental mistake in so many organizations where the leadership team just kind of hands off the whole recruitment process to HR or even an external recruiter. And then they just wait passively for the perfect candidate to magically appear, fully vetted and culturally aligned.
Right, like it's an order you place.
Exactly. And York argues so emphatically that while HR professionals are, of course, absolutely essential, they're fantastic at managing the logistics, the compliance, the paperwork. They support the process.
But the leader owns the outcome. You just cannot outsource accountability for who joins your team because that person dictates the entire trajectory of the team itself. And I find that perspective so empowering because it forces leaders to stay engaged, to maintain incredibly high standards. So let's dig into why this is fundamentally an executive function and not just, an administrative task.
Because every single hiring decision is, at its root, a cultural decision. It's an active vote for the kind of organization you want to become. Every hire directly impacts 4 really critical areas: the day-to-day team culture, the baseline for performance standards, the communication rhythm, and maybe most importantly, the level of accountability the team expects from one another.
And if a leader hires someone who's a low performer or someone who's always defensive or, manipulative,
That immediately and visibly lowers the standard for every single person on that team who is watching that situation unfold. It sends a message.
and the secondary consequence there is that the manager then has to spend months, maybe even quarters, trying to fix the problems created by that one bad hire. All that energy goes into correction and conflict resolution instead of strategy, innovation, and growing the business. It's a huge opportunity cost.
It is the single biggest time sink for managers, hands down. York illustrates this so powerfully with an analogy of a startup founder, but honestly, it applies to any team, any size. So imagine a founder who personally interviews the first 10 hires, and she's focusing like a laser, not just on their raw skills, but on deep cultural alignment, long-term potential, growth mindset. That founder is setting a really robust, strong cultural foundation, a kind of DNA that just permeates the company for years, becomes self-reinforcing.
And the contrast.
The contrast is the founder who rushes those early hires just to fill seats or meet some arbitrary deadline. They end up struggling chronically with misalignment, with poor communication, and inevitably with higher turnover down the road. They are always, always fighting fires.
That makes perfect sense. It's the difference between building a house on solid bedrock versus rushing and, building it on shifting sand. York suggests that hiring is like laying the bricks for a building, a weak foundation.
Yeah.
You just can't fix it with decoration or some minor managerial tweaks later on. It's too late.
Once those poor standards or misaligned people establish the culture, changing that culture becomes exponentially harder and more costly.
So leaders have to take absolute, non-negotiable ownership of what were the three things?
First, defining what success actually looks like for the role. Second, staying deeply involved in the objective decision-making process. And third, modeling the standards they expect. You can't delegate the soul of your company. That belongs to leadership.
It's a really compelling argument. Now, moving to lesson 7, and yes, we are jumping ahead in the book, but this concept is just so foundational. York insists we have to commit to slow down, to speed up, strategic patience. This just flies directly in the face of modern corporate culture, where everything had to be done yesterday.
And that's exactly why most companies struggle with this. They mistake speed for efficiency. York argues fiercely that the pervasive myth that fast hiring saves time is actually destructive. I mean, it feels good in the moment, right? The hiring manager rushes, fills the vacant seat, the pressure is off, but that short-term desperation guarantees a chain reaction of negative long-term consequences. High turnover, low employee engagement, repeated and costly training cycles, and ultimately leadership burnout from constantly cleaning up avoidable mistakes.
But let me ask the skeptical question here, the one I know a lot of our listeners are thinking. If we slow down, aren't we just risking losing the top candidate to a competitor who moves faster? How does she address that reality?
That is a very valid pressure point, but York's response is that the best candidates, the truly high performers, they're actually looking for structure and intentionality. A fast process might lure in candidates who are themselves desperate or who just value speed over a good long-term fit. But the A player, they want to know that the organization they're joining values clarity, due diligence, and a high cultural standard. A thoughtful, structured, transparent process. It signals stability and seriousness.
So you might lose someone.
Yes, you might lose the candidate who insists on an offer in 48 hours. But York suggests that those candidates often value the process of getting the job more than the long-term work itself.
So that short-term urgency is really an illusion of efficiency. And sometimes it's even a red flag for a bad candidate. I mean, if a rushed hire only lasts 6 months and then you have to repeat the entire process, you've not only wasted half a year of salary and productivity, but you've also lost the focused work of the person who had to train them and the enormous emotional cost to the team.
Exactly. Why is slowing down truly faster? Because it leads to fewer selection mistakes. That translates directly into stronger employee loyalty. They feel like they were chosen intentionally, not just rushed in out of desperation. And this leads to higher sustained productivity, lower managerial overhead, and most importantly, scalable growth. If your hiring process can't handle real scrutiny, you cannot scale your team effectively. The wheels will come off.
York's analogy here is just so powerful. She says, cutting corners during hiring is like skipping crucial measurements when you're building a bridge. It's always going to collapse later under stress, or at the very least it'll warp and fail to carry the load it was meant for.
And the long-term cost of that collapse, both financially and culturally, always outweighs the short-term inconvenience of waiting a few more weeks to find the right, truly aligned person. It's not just a hiring tactic, it's an investment strategy. You invest time and rigor up front to save massive amounts of pain, resources, and managerial attention on the back end.
The strategic foundation is set then. Leaders own hiring, and they have to be patient. So now we can move into the practical frameworks for actually doing it. If hiring has to be slow and owned by leadership, the next step is building the structure for objectivity. And that starts with lesson 3. Define the role before you fill the role.
This point seems, it seems ridiculously obvious, right? Who wouldn't define a role? But it is one of the most common organizational pitfalls. Most companies start with these really vague job descriptions that just list a bunch of tasks and tools, must know Photoshop, manage social media, attend meetings. These vague descriptions lead directly to vague accountability, confusion, and eventually performance failures. Leaders have to understand what success looks like, the tangible impact, before they even let anyone start the search.
So we need to move way beyond a simple list of duties. What exactly has to be defined to meet York's standard? It sounds like she wants a blueprint of the job's impact, not just a list of its functions.
That's precisely right. York emphasizes creating what she calls an outcome-based job description. She suggests that 80% of the description should focus on the required outcomes and metrics, and only 20% on the routine tasks. And she requires a deep breakdown of several key areas. First, core responsibilities, and crucially, specific decision-making authority. Who gets to say yes or no without escalating?
That's a big one.
It's huge. Second, crystal clear success metrics. What are the 3 non-negotiable results this person must deliver in the first 12 months? Not be proactive, but reduce customer churn by 5%. Third, explicit communication expectations. How do they interface with the team, with leadership? And finally, the required values alignment, which we'll get into more detail on later.
Right. If you can't define success, you absolutely can't measure performance objectively. And that example she uses about the marketing manager is so good. If you just hire for that title without specifying if the role is focused on high-level strategy or content creation or deep analytics, you guarantee confusion. Everyone walks in with a different expectation.
You're setting the employee up for failure. They walk in thinking the job is about strategy, but the manager assumes they'll be in the weeds with analytics. The outcome is just misalignment. York's emphasis is entirely on measurable impact. The job description shouldn't say, manage our blog. It should say, increase organic search traffic by 40% in Q3 through a defined content strategy.
And that completely reframes the entire interview process. York suggests the best interview question isn't that lazy standard, can you do this job, which just invites generic rehearsed answers. Instead, it has to be outcome-driven. Something like, here's what success looks like. Have you done this before? Show me the specific project that matches this outcome.
That is a subtle but massive revolutionary shift. It moves the entire conversation from the theoretical, I think I can, to the historical and the measurable. I have done it, and here's the result. You're no longer asking for a promise of future performance. You're demanding concrete proof of past execution.
Which, of course, brings us directly to lesson 2, which helps us navigate that execution phase. Clarity beats charisma, avoiding the personality trap. And we all struggle with this. We have all been in an interview where someone is just impressive. They knock it out of the park with confidence, polished communication skills. You walk out thinking, wow, they're a star.
And that star quality, York warns, often masks fundamental incompetence or misalignment. Charisma is an incredibly effective form of impression management. We're biologically wired to trust confidence and smooth talk. But in hiring, it leads to the trap of hiring the most charming person, not the most competent one. Often it's the quieter candidates, the ones focused on details, execution, deep expertise, who really outperform, but they get overlooked in a charisma contest.
So if we need to look past that shiny, polished exterior, what are the measurable, objective things we should be focusing on instead? How do we neutralize our own bias towards charm?
We have to focus obsessively on observable, measurable evidence. That means looking for role-specific behaviors, consistent performance patterns across multiple jobs, and this is critical, how candidates actually solved past problems, not just how they describe their general philosophy. We need detailed narratives of action. And we have to assess their ownership of past failures and their response to critique, which is much, much harder to fake than confidence.
I wonder, though, are we being too suspicious of charisma? If a candidate is charming and articulate, doesn't that indicate strong communication skills, which are crucial for, say, a leadership role?
That's a fair point. But York encourages us to view communication through the lens of impact, not style. A charming conversationalist is great for an interview, but a great communicator on the job is someone who can write clear project specs, run efficient meetings, and articulate strategy simply. These are observable behaviors. The risk with these high charisma, low clarity people, as York points out, is that they excel at presenting progress while potentially failing at delivering results. They're masters of making others feel good, but they lack the operational rigor to execute.
That real-world contrast really clarifies it. We're comparing the candidate who just says they are excellent with people, which is totally subjective,
Right.
with the one who explains a specific, measurable client retention system they built, showing how it increased client results by 22%. It's proof over promise every single time.
That is the clarity York demands. Charisma is the shiny car exterior. Clarity and competence are the engine under the hood. You might enjoy the ride in the shiny car for a bit, but only the robust engine will get you where you need to go long term.
And the ultimate tool for finding that substance is the subject of Lesson 4, which York calls the strongest pillar of the entire book. Past behavior predicts future performance, behavioral interviewing. This is the ultimate hiring GPS.
If you implement only one lesson from this entire book, make it this one. Seriously. York argues that the single most reliable indicator of how someone will handle a future situation, conflict, failure, deadline pressure, is how they handled a similar situation in the past. It shifts the interview away from the hypothetical and into documented, verifiable reality.
So instead of asking that lazy, future-looking question like, what would you do if a client complained about your work? Which just lets the candidate give a perfect textbook answer of what they think they should do.
You immediately shift to concrete behavioral questions. For anyone who's not familiar with it, we are talking about the STAR method. STAR stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. It's a simple, repeatable framework designed to extract the maximum detail about a past event.
Let's break that down for any listener who hasn't used STAR before. So if you ask, tell me about a time when they have to structure their answer with those 4 components.
Exactly. Situation S. Describe the background context. Task T. What was the specific challenge you had to address? Action A. What were the precise steps you personally took to tackle it? And result. What was the measurable outcome and what did you learn?
Why does this simple shift work so well? Why does it eliminate so much of the guesswork?
Because hypothetical answers are based on ambition and theory, but behavioral answers are rooted in demonstrated action and reality. When you ask a behavioral question and you insist on the STAR format, the candidate is forced to expose 4 key things. First, their real problem-solving pattern. Second, their accountability mindset. Do they take responsibility or shift blame? Third, their conflict response style. And fourth, it just strips away the polish. It forces them to recall specific details, which makes it really hard to fabricate.
The ownership test embedded in that answer is just an incredible way to differentiate people. Let's take 2 candidates talking about a project failure. Contrast the one who blames their old company. My last company didn't support me with the budget, which is pure blame shifting.
Right.
With the one who says, I didn't adapt fast enough to the market change, and I failed to get early buy-in from the product team, which is all about ownership.
That willingness to own mistakes, to show humility, and to articulate a clear path to improvement, that is a defining characteristic of a high-performance team member. Blame shifting is a deeply ingrained behavioral pattern that York warns is almost impossible to train out of an employee. You are hiring the pattern, not just the person. If they demonstrated blame shifting in their last 3 jobs, they will absolutely bring that pattern to your company, no matter how good their resume looks.
So the hiring GPS tells us where the candidate has been, and that's the best indicator of where they were going to take your team. It's all about objective evidence. The next layer, and this is where we really protect our organizations from internal sabotage, is the culture screen. This is captured in Lesson 5. Values alignment matters more than skill. This is the classic cautionary tale against hiring the brilliant jerk.
This is maybe the single most important lesson for long-term organizational health, especially in high-growth companies. York's core principle here is just, it's undeniable. Skills can be taught. You can train someone on new software, new methodology, whatever. A core values like integrity, humility, accountability, you can't teach those. A clash in values is a terminal diagnosis for an employment relationship, no matter how talented the person is.
So why do leaders constantly make that mistake of prioritizing skill over values? Is it just desperation, or do they not understand the true cost?
It's often desperation combined with a really short-sighted focus on the immediate problem. If a leader is facing an engineering bottleneck, they just desperately need a coder. They see your resume with impressive skills and they think, I can deal with the personality issues later. But they fail to realize that the highly talented employee with poor values doesn't just underperform, they actively damage the entire ecosystem.
And what does that damage look like specifically?
It creates institutional drag. The misaligned employee becomes defensive when challenged. They introduce political maneuvering and gossip. They constantly look to shift blame, and they're inherently disruptive. They poison the well. The best technical skill in the world is totally worthless if the person who has it refuses to collaborate or accept feedback.
The book shares that classic, agonizing example of the brilliant developer or salesperson. They produce incredible individual results, but they refuse any peer review. They shut down feedback, treat other staff poorly.
Exactly. And while their individual output might be high, their cultural tax is just staggering. They effectively slow down the entire team by becoming a bottleneck and a constant source of friction. York quantifies this. Their negative cultural impact almost always outweighs their technical talent in the long run.
Which brings us to that famous analogy. Talent without values is like horsepower without brakes. It's fast, but it's dangerous and unstable. York clarifies the hierarchy here, suggesting the order must be an unshakable filter. Character behavior skill.
It's the essential screening sequence. Character core values like humility and integrity determines behavior. And only then do you assess skill. If character fails, the whole process stops immediately. If you invert that, if you hire for skill first, you expose yourself to catastrophic cultural damage.
To make this actionable, what are the core values York suggests leaders should prioritize screening for?
She points to crucial foundational values that are behavioral in nature: genuine accountability, humility, a strong work ethic, adaptability, honesty, and collaboration. And you have to design behavioral questions that specifically probe these values. Something like, tell me about a time you had to change direction after receiving critical feedback you disagreed with.
Moving beyond just individual values, York provides several supporting frameworks for fair evaluation, specifically focusing on how to avoid the unconscious biases that derail even the best interviewers.
Absolutely. The whole goal of the structured process is to guard against these emotional, instinctive decisions. She highlights 3 critical biases to watch out for. First is the like-me bias, the subconscious tendency to favor candidates who remind you of yourself. This leads to homogeneous teams which lack diverse thought.
That one seems so powerful and so subtle. What's the second bias?
The second is the halo effect. This is where one overwhelmingly positive trait, say a degree from a prestigious school or a great opening answer, causes you to view all their other traits positively, even without any evidence. You just assume competence across the board.
And the third?
The third is recency bias. This is where you're overly influenced by the last candidate you spoke to. If candidate A was terrible, candidate B, who is just average, can seem like a rock star in contrast. You lose all perspective.
These biases are the enemy of objective clarity. So to combat them, York suggests implementing what she calls the hiring filter system. It sounds like a defense mechanism against our own human flaws.
That's exactly what it is, a multi-layered quality control system. The filter system requires multiple independent layers of structured evaluation rather than relying on one make-or-break interview. It's a sequence. First, a score-based resume review, then a structured behavioral interview, then maybe a skills assessment, then a structured team interaction, and finally, a dedicated values screening.
And the crucial point is that if a candidate fails at any one layer, they don't move forward to the next. That prevents something like the halo effect from carrying them through the whole process.
Precisely. It prevents you from falling in love with a candidate too early. By requiring objective success at sequential stages, you ensure the final decision is based on a composite view of competence and character.
And finally, a key insight into the process itself, the psychological safety principle. We often think of interviews as adversarial, where we try to poke holes in the candidate's story.
York argues that adversarial interviews are totally counterproductive. The environment is crucial. Candidates have to feel psychologically safe to tell the truth, especially about their failures, which is the most valuable data you can get. If the interview process is fear-driven or intimidating, the only answers you'll get are carefully rehearsed, inauthentic ones. A safe, respectful environment allows them to be vulnerable, show real accountability, and show their true problem-solving process, which is what you are actually trying to hire.
Okay, so we've used structure, clarity, and behavioral evidence to select the right person. But it's Lesson 6 tells us the job is only half done. Hiring is only half the process, onboarding is the other half.
This is where so many excellent hiring decisions fall apart. It's tragic. A truly great hire can still absolutely fail if the integration process is weak or confusing. If you hired a person who thrived on structure and defined expectations, and then you just throw them into a figure-it-out-yourself environment, you've set them up for immense frustration and failure. You've wasted all that upfront rigor.
So what does York's effective onboarding process look like? It sounds like it's a lot more detailed than just handing them a laptop and doing a quick intro on day one.
It's a critical extension of the hiring strategy. It has to be structured around clarity and rapid accountability. Effective onboarding needs to define role expectations precisely, map out crystal clear performance milestones for the first 30, 60, and 90 days, and explicitly communicate cultural norms. How do we communicate? How do we handle disagreements? It also has to establish a formal feedback rhythm and assign early projects that let them get a meaningful win quickly.
Let's talk specifics on that 90-day plan. What are the key milestones they should be hitting?
York breaks it down into phases. The first 30 days is all about assimilation and learning. The new hire should be focused on understanding the business, meeting stakeholders, and just demonstrating they know how to do the job. The next 30 days, so days 30 to 60, is about application and early contribution. They should be taking ownership of smaller tasks and delivering their first tangible outcome. And by the 90-day mark, the final phase, they should reach full ownership and independent productivity. They're expected to be fully operating in the role, meeting those core success metrics we defined way back in Lesson 3.
So the critical first 90 days has to be managed like a deliberate pilot program for their long-term success.
It absolutely defines their long-term confidence, productivity, and, critically, their loyalty. An employee who succeeds early and feels supported gains confidence and trusts the organization. York stresses that structured, intentional onboarding consistently outperforms that hands-off, sink or swim method, which just leaves new employees feeling isolated and confused.
I love the simplicity of the analogy she uses. Hiring is planting the seed, onboarding is nurturing and watering it. You can have the best seed in the world, but without the right environment, it just won't grow.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the ultimate motivation for changing our entire system, the sheer financial devastation of the cost of a bad hire. Leaders really need to internalize this number to justify the upfront investment in slowing down and adding rigor.
The numbers York presents in the book are just staggering, and they're easy to forget until you have to write that severance check.
They put the urgency of the problem into stark context. York quantifies the direct financial expense. One bad hire is generally estimated to cost between 30 and 50% of the annual salary for that position. That's just the direct cost of recruitment fees, manager's time, lost productivity, salary paid while they were failing, and severance.
But those direct costs, they're just the tip of the iceberg, right? What about the soft costs, which are harder to calculate but maybe even more damaging?
The soft costs are where the real organizational pain lies. This includes the lost productivity of the entire team that had to cover for the poor performer, the massive leadership distraction, the delay in critical project timelines, and the irreversible damage to team morale that comes from working alongside someone who is clearly not pulling their weight or is culturally toxic. It just lowers the bar for everyone.
It's a hidden tax of poor hiring. And if, despite all the structure, a hire is truly misaligned, York introduces a final necessary concept for leadership integrity: the no rescue rule and ethical exits.
This is a point about management courage. Managers should not, under any circumstances, overcompensate for poor hires. If you have someone who is fundamentally misaligned and you start doing their work for them or giving them endless chances beyond the established 90-day plan, you are rewarding mediocrity and actively harming the team members who are performing.
Which completely undermines the performance standard we talked about earlier. It signals to your A players that accountability is optional.
Absolutely. The no rescue rule means that the team member who made the hiring decision has to face the consequence of that error by correcting it quickly and cleanly. The actionable item here is that misalignment must be addressed fast, clearly, and crucially, respectfully. Letting misaligned employees exit with dignity protects the culture by proving that the standards you claim to uphold are genuine and the system is fair for everyone.
This has been an incredibly practical and detailed summary of her framework. We started with the philosophy that hiring is leadership, and we've ended with the actionable steps of onboarding and ethical exits. Let's try to distill all this wisdom into a checklist that our listeners can apply immediately. We can structure it as 10 core steps.
A clear roadmap. Let's start with phase 1, preparation and defining success.
Okay, phase 1, preparation. Step 1, write success before you write the job post. Define the measurable outcomes this role must achieve, not just the tasks. Step 2, evaluate values before skills. Dedicate specific interview time to screen for character and humility. Character has to pass the filter before skills are even considered. And step 3, never hire based on urgency. Accept the pain of a vacancy. Desperation is the most reliable predictor of future regret.
Perfect. Now, phase 2, which is all about execution and objective vetting, this is where you neutralize bias.
Right. Phase 2, execution. Step 4, run structured interviews. Ask the same core, behavior-focused questions to every single candidate. That ensures a fair, comparable data set. Step 5, use behavioral interview questions only. Abandon hypotheticals. Focus on real-world experiences using the STAR method. Step 6, involve the team thoughtfully. Future peers should participate in a structured evaluation, but leadership has to maintain the ultimate decision-making accountability.
And finally, phase 3, integration and maintenance. This ensures the investment actually pays off.
Phase 3, integration and maintenance. Step 7, design a 90-day onboarding plan. Set clear, measurable expectations for the first 3 months. Step 8, give early feedback, good and bad. Address issues immediately during onboarding and celebrate early wins. Step 9, measure performance, not personality. Track the objective outcomes you defined back in Step 1. Avoid emotional decisions based on charm or likability. And finally, Step 10, let misaligned employees exit with dignity. When a separation is necessary, handle it respectfully and quickly to protect the integrity of your team and culture.
So what's the final synthesis here? If you read Mastering Hiring, what's the single most lasting impression you should walk away with?
I think it's that this is not a book about HR efficiency. It's a leadership manual disguised as a recruitment guide. Every single hiring decision you make is a cultural decision. Every role you fill reflects your standards, your clarity, and your courage as a leader. It forces you to stop reacting to hiring emergencies and start building intentional, high-performance teams.
And to leave you with the 5 most memorable, non-negotiable lessons from Stephanie York, these are really the pillars that support the entire system.
First, hiring is leadership, not administration.
Second, past behavior predicts future performance.
Third, values beat skills every single time.
Fourth, slow hiring saves fast-growing teams massive amounts of time and money later on.
And fifth, great onboarding multiplies the effect of great hiring.
If your organization suffers from chronic high turnover, low morale, or recurring performance issues that management can't seem to fix, York suggests the core problem likely didn't start in management. It started much earlier, in hiring. And remember that powerful defining quote, "Culture is not what you say, it is who you tolerate."
By mastering hiring, you fundamentally raise your standards for who you tolerate, and therefore, what your organizational culture actually becomes. We really hope you enjoyed this summary of Stephanie York's Mastering Hiring. If you found this helpful and you want more book summaries that give you critical knowledge fast, please subscribe to our channel, Book by Book. Share this with any managers or leaders you know who are struggling to scale their teams, and please like this summary. It seriously motivates us to keep bringing you the best book insights possible. Thank you for listening.